Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. We are in for a treat today because we have two amazing authors who will be in conversation about this important book. This is the gentleman who'll be talking to Susan. These two books are on my nightstand, and after today, I have a feeling they'll be on yours as well. Welcome to the Glenbard Parent Series. Everyone is welcome here. Please let others know across the street, across the country, that we have programming almost every single week, sometimes twice a week. So take a look at the website, take a look at the YouTube channel. There are so many great resources there for families. We want to thank our sponsors who make this possible. And most of all, thank you for the gift of your time and your trust in this hour that we have together at the GPS Parent Series. Before we begin, I want to quickly mention what is upcoming in the next few weeks. Next week, we are welcoming for the first time Shefali Tesperi. She is the author of the book, The Parent Map. That will be happening next Tuesday, the 23rd at noon and at 7 p.m. The following week, David Sheff. We also have a program in Spanish coming up, in Urdu coming up on Thursday. And then David Sheff will be back on the 31st. He'll be in conversation with Jessica Leahy. She's the author of the book, The Gift of Failure. Beautiful Boy was a book written by David about his son. It was later made into a film. It will be an interesting and important conversation. We're kicking off Black History Month. Dr. Tyrone Howard returns. He'll be talking about his book, All Children Must Thrive. And then the following week, we'll be looking at what you need to know about college and careers with Mark Perna on the 6th at noon and 7 p.m. So circle your calendar. And without further ado, just can't wait to get into this conversation. And I thank you so much for coming. Ben Peterselli will be introducing our speakers today. Ben is the principal of Glenbard West. Please take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Gilda. Equally excited. Susan Cain and Dan Pink are here today. Susan Cain is the author of the #1 New York Times bestsellers, Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, and Bittersweet, How Sorrow and Longing Make Us Whole. Susan's books have been translated into 40+ languages, and her record-smashing TED Talks have been viewed over 50 million times on TED and YouTube combined. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, and many other publications. Susan's good friend and friend to GPS, Dan Pink, will join in this important conversation on Bittersweet. Dan is the author of 5 award-winning New York Times bestsellers, including his latest, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Us Forward. His other books include the New York Times bestsellers When and A Whole New Mind, as well as the #1 New York Times bestsellers Drive and To Sell Is Human. Susan Cain and Dan Pink partner with Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Grant to curate the Next Big Idea Book Club. They donate all their proceeds to children's literacy programs. And now, please join me in welcoming these two very special, distinguished authors back to GPS today, Susan and Dan.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Susan.
Thank you, Ben, and hi, Dan. I feel like it's been about a year or so
I
since we've
think it's
seen
been
each other. Is that about
been a
it?
while. It's been a while since we've actually seen each other. I want to say face to
That's
face,
even
but
longer.
camera to camera. It's been a little while. So I'm happy to talk to you about this book and be part of this great series. So let's just get started. I'm going to ask you the question that is the first question in almost every author interview. So you should be prepared. You ready?
I have no idea what this is.
Why'd you write? Why'd you write this book?
Why did I write this book? Well, this book started with just this mysterious experience that I kept having and couldn't figure out for the life of me. But I'll tell you about one particular, like the experience happened again and again, but I'll tell you about one particular version of it, which is when I was in law school a gazillion years ago, long before I became a writer. And some friends were coming to pick me up in my dorm room. We were all going to go to class together. And they arrived in my dorm room to find me listening to, I don't know what it was. It was probably something like Leonard Cohen, but like some very, sad and, mournful music full of longing. And they thought that was hilarious. And they were like, what, why are you listening to this, this funeral music? And I thought that was curious at the time, but I couldn't get the question out of my head, because for me, when I listened to that kind of music, and still do, I invariably experience this deep sense of connection with humanity and a deep happiness, and a kind of gratitude to the musician for being able to express the human condition in such a beautiful way, and all of it. And I felt like there was more to that experience than met the eye, and I wanted to figure out what was behind it. And I also wanted to understand, what is it in our culture that makes it so weird to be blasting that kind of music in your dorm room?
Mm-hmm. But is it really that weird? I mean, you say in the book that you have some really fascinating data. I mean, there are all kinds of really lovely tidbits in this book, but one of them has to do with some data on how often people listen to one kind of song versus another kind of song. So you're not as much of an outlier, are you?
Well, that's true. And you're right. Like the data on this is fascinating. One of my favorite bits of it is that the people who, let me see if I can get these numbers right, but the people whose favorite song on their playlist is a happy song, they listen to it about 175 times on average. The people who love their sad music, and that's their favorite song, they listen 800 times. 800 times.
So
And they report to the researchers exactly the experience I was describing, that listening gives them this sense of connection to everything that's deep and sublime in the world. But I would still say, even though I am far from an outlier, um, we have very distinct social norms about
absolutely.
how and when you're supposed to kind of go there. And I don't just mean go to sad music. I mean, like, go to these kinds of topics in general. So like when it comes to music, you're supposed to be listening to it quietly
Bobby
and
McFerrin.
privately. You're not supposed to be blasting it in
Yeah.
from your dorm room speaker, and so on.
Yeah, no, that was a surprise of your classmates who came to retrieve you that one afternoon. So, so take me so that catalyst a few years ago when you were in law school brought you to the moment when you wrote this book. What if any, is the connection between this book and your previous book, Quiet?
Well, when I first started working on this book, I thought of it as a completely different topic, because
Interesting.
as you can see, it's like I just set out to answer this particular question, and what does that really have to do with the power of introverts in an extroverted world, which was my previous book. Um, but what I ended up realizing at a certain point through the process was that there's a way in which this was a very parallel inquiry, because this book is talking about Bittersweet is talking about a way of being in this world, a kind of attunement to the sorrow as well as the joy of life, and to what I believe is the transcendence behind that. It's focusing on a way of being that is not really permitted or sanctioned in our culture. And so I get the same kinds of letters in response to this book that I got to Quiet, which is, thank you for giving me permission to actually be me and to actually do the things that I want to do and not feel weird about them.
Right. So let's ask. So as Ben mentioned at the top, we participate in this project called the Next Big Idea Club. So let me ask a question that sort of emanates from that. So here's this book. What's the big idea in this book? Tell us the big idea in this book, and then we'll talk more about some of the contents of it and what it means for us as individuals, as parents, as educators.
So the big idea in this book is that there is a way of being that is attuned, as I said, to the sorrow as well as to the joy of human existence, and to a really deep attunement to the fact that everything in this world is impermanent, including everyone and everything we love best. It's all impermanent. But that what comes from that attunement is creativity and connection and transcendence. So far from these being states of being that I think people feel like these are states of being that lead to anxiety and despair and an inability to cope. And the argument in this book is that's not actually right. It's rather like just a full-throated embrace of being human.
Yeah, this is super interesting because I have to say, I mean, I had read this book initially, probably like a year and a half ago, maybe even 2 years ago. And until this conversation right here, I didn't actually see the strong connection between this and quiet.
Oh,
That is,
interesting.
that is like now it's, I mean, maybe I'm a slow learner. That's part of it. But another part, but there really is this idea that, um, that there's a certain, as you put it, a certain way of being that is not necessarily recognized as the full and complete way of being. And you're trying to call it out of hiding because it is so prevalent, but also yields an array of different kinds of benefits. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of fascinating. Are
Yeah,
there
and
moments?
sorry, just
Go
just
ahead.
to say what the other similarity about that with quiet is that just as you don't need to be an introvert to sometimes want to be quiet or to feel that there's value in, the quiet places in your life, the same is true here. Some of
Mm,
us tend more to this kind of happiness of melancholy state that
yeah.
I inhabit a lot. So some of us really tend to go there, and there's a quiz in the book that people can take to figure out where they fall on this metric. But even for people who really hardly ever go there, they still get it, and they still every so often have that need to be in that way of being.
And to build on that, to respect people who are in that way of being, even
Yes.
if they are not typically in that way of being or in that way of being at the moment. In the same way that I think that one of the benefits of quiet is that it gave people who aren't introverts a
Mm-hmm.
new perspective on that way of being. Give us a sense. Let's go a little bit, just a little bit more specificity here.
Mm-hmm.
When you say bittersweet, use the phrase and use it in the book, sort of the happiness of melancholy. Give us a sense of sort of what does it mean to feel bittersweet or to be in that way of being?
Well, I mean, maybe one way to get at it is to look at some of the questions that we put
Yeah,
together in the quiz to help
yeah,
people measure it. And by the way, this is a quiz that I developed with the psychologists Scott Barry Kaufman and David Yaden, and we found all kinds of fascinating things. So
yeah,
the quiz asks questions like,
yeah. Now I'm not a good subject for this because I'm going to come up goose egg on just about every single one. But we'll do it for the audience.
well, it's funny that you say that because I did an event once with, you probably know Angela Duckworth, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So Angela, uh, our audience may or may not know, she's just like a very hilarious. How do you describe her? She's just like a very can-do, hilarious, upbeat
Yeah.
person.
Can do is a
And
great word for her.
what's that? Can
Can
do.
do is a great two words for her, I guess. And she's also a super smart and just a genuinely good person too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so she told me she took the quiz and she was like, I scored a zero, like a zero on every single question.
Yeah.
So I wonder if
Uh,
that's you also. But
I
that was just
think
such a
we'll
funny
do it
moment
again.
to me.
Maybe I've changed. Maybe I've seen the light. Maybe I've grown my way into this new way of being. And I'll go. I think I was a one, but
Okay. All right. So I don't know if we'll go through all of them or not,
yeah,
but the deal is to indicate how much you agree with the following things on a scale of 1
right.
to 10. And the first one is, do you tear up easily at touching TV commercials?
So I'm curious, the folks out there, I mean, where would you put yourself on this?
Oh, me? I answer very high on every single one of these
Yeah,
questions.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me, Susan, you probably have forgotten this. Years ago, this is probably 10 years ago, you and I had a conversation, and for whatever weird, you probably have no recollection of this, but it's stuck in my head.
I'm so
Um,
curious what this is going to be.
but it's related to this.
Hmm.
You somehow we were talking about goosebumps. I don't even the physical, the
Yeah.
dermatological phenomenon, not the R.L. Stein series. And the and you said like, how often do you get goosebumps? And I said never. And I
Uh,
said, how about you? And you said like something like daily.
oh, many times a day,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
just
yeah,
daily. Yeah.
yeah.
And in fact, yes, that is a question on this quiz. Are you moved to goosebumps several times a day? So maybe that question was unconsciously motivated by that conversation that we had all those years ago.
Perhaps, but I think it's interesting. And what do we know? I don't know if you have the numbers on this, but what do we know? Is there like a typical answer to that question? I mean, truly, like my answer to that question is never. So
Wow.
and I'm probably but I can't imagine that I'm that representative. Are people typically like a 5, or what have you found about that?
That is actually a really good question for that specific
Yeah.
phenomenon. I'm just not sure. And I bet there
Okay.
is a lot of data on it. And I also am pretty sure that getting goosebumps regularly, just like bittersweetness, it has a high correlation with a trait of high sensitivity.
I bet that's right.
Yeah,
I bet
just for
that's right.
people who aren't familiar with that trait, that was a term that was coined by the psychologist Elaine Aron to describe people who just kind of react more intensely to everything in life. So an annoying sound outside your window is
Right.
that much more noxious, but the beautiful sunset is that much more beautiful. And that describes about 15 to 20% of the population who seem to be born with that kind of temperament.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Give us a
Okay.
couple more questions about to give the folks listening whether they somehow their lives somehow map onto this bittersweet way of being.
Yeah. Okay. So another one is, do you react intensely to art, music, or nature? What would you say about yourself?
That was the one that
your
I
one?
actually had a higher. That was the one that I had a higher. The only one where I actually was, I think, above 0 on that one.
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
I do on that, and
Mhm.
and yeah, so this particularly, again, it's idiosyncratic, but certainly for me, much more visual art than music.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, I'm not saying that's good or bad. That
Yeah.
just is.
No, it's just it's always fascinating to me how different that is for everyone. Like
Yeah.
our friend Gretchen Rubin talks about how she reacts almost not at all to music,
Mm.
but for her scents are a very intense gateway.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. So the goosebumps one I think is a big one.
I'm
Do
a
you feel
0. I truly don't remember. I don't think I've gotten goosebumps since I was a kid.
Wow? What about? I'll tell you a catalyst. We'll call it a catalyst that regularly gives me goosebumps, which is reader mail. Like someone will comment on something I've written or send an article, and they'll tell me some moving story, and I'm like, um, and I know you love your reader mail, but I guess you just don't react in that
I
particular
love my reader
way.
mail. I love my reader mail. I love anybody who takes the time to read something and send it to me. Alas, it does not evoke goosebumps.
Okay. Um, Here's another one. Do you seek out beauty in your everyday life? Um, have other people described you as an old soul? Do you find comfort or inspiration in a rainy day? Which is not to say, by the way, like
Yeah.
I and most extreme bittersweet people, I don't think we like uninterrupted rain more than anyone else, but there's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
about the like, deliciousness of the rainy day here and there
Sure.
that
If you're, I mean,
speaks to the bittersweet soul.
if you're inside, I can appreciate that, I guess, more kind of intellectually than virtually. So let me ask you a question. So one of the things I like about this book, and I think it's a tribute to you as a writer, is the way that you have mostly, not in every case, but yeah, maybe in every case, mostly um, titled the chapters with a question.
Hmm.
And I love that because it suggests sort of an inquisitiveness, and that and I think part of the book is that we're going with you on this journey into understanding this thing,
Yeah.
into understanding yourself and into understanding this way of being. You do a lot of reporting at conferences and things like that. So let me ask you the first question in the first chapter, which is this: what is sadness good for?
Well, I guess I'll point right away to the three items that I mentioned at the beginning, though there's so much to unpack with each one, but creativity, connection, and transcendence.
Okay.
And
Let's take those one by one. Creativity.
Yeah. Okay.
So being sad can foster creativity. I mean, you have a whole chapter on that, but you're saying being sad can enable, foster, instigate creativity.
I don't know that it instigates it, but I think there's something in human nature that wants to take pain and turn it into something else.
Interesting.
Which is why we see, I mean, you have to define creativity really broadly for this, because this is why we see, like, after 9/11, suddenly lots of people signed up to become firefighters. And at the height of the pandemic, suddenly people were applying to medical school and nursing school. So there's something in the human spirit that, things are going wrong. And instead of fleeing from it, you might say the last thing you want to become is a firefighter after 9/11. But
Right.
instead there's this urge to take it and make something of it. And when it comes to creativity, oh, and here's somebody saying my son,
This is
oh, it's
Gilda saying it, yeah.
saying my son became a firefighter after 9/11. There you go. And when it comes to creativity specifically, I love that, Gilda. There's been a kind of debate that has been raging, I would say, in psychological circles for a while about this, because there is the time-honored myth, let's say, of the tortured
Right.
genius creative. And then there's been a lot of people who've come along and said, no, that's not really right. And that's just a myth. I think the truth is somewhere in between, in that you can't be, it's very difficult, let's say, to be full on depressed and creative, because creativity is a form of numbness. It's a form of despair that prevents you from, even if you're having a creative thought, getting it out into the light of day.
Depression is a form of numbness and despair, yes.
Exactly. Oh, did I say creativity?
Yeah.
Depression. But there's all these fascinating studies that show things like one study looked at 531 eminent creatives, and I think it was 45% of them had lost a parent before the age of 20.
It's extraordinary.
45% of them.
That study about orphans, I have it I pulled up my notes on this. That was I have that starred. And an astonishingly high percentage of highly creative people were orphaned in childhood. 25% had lost at least one parent by the age of 10. By age 15, it was 34%. By age 20, it was 45%. That's astonishing to me.
It is so astonishing. And then there's studies that get at this in other ways also. Like there was one where they asked a group of students to make a speech about whatever, about their dream job. And the researchers set things up in such a way that half of the students spoke to an audience that gave them great feedback, smiling, lots of applause. And the other half of the students, unfortunately for them, had an audience that had been instructed in advance to look very disapproving and bored, no applause. And the students that emerged from that second condition, of course, were not in a great mood. But all the students were asked to perform a creative task after that. They all had to do a collage, which were then rated for quality by a group of artists. And the students who had given the speeches to the disapproving audiences made better collages than the ones who didn't. And of that group, the ones who whose blood tests showed that they had a hormone that predisposed them to depression, actually, but weren't necessarily depressed at the moment, but just this hormone that brings with it that sensitivity, they made the most creative collages of all. So you see this happening in all these different, through all these different strands, and I think it ratifies an intuition that many of us have.
Yeah.
Because I think we've all had that experience of being in a melancholy moment and suddenly ideas, thoughts, emotions, or the ability to express them rises up within us. I remember right after my brother died, I remember sitting and writing and feeling like everything that's coming out right now, it won't be able to come out a few days from now. It couldn't have come out a few days earlier. It's this moment that's giving rise to these words. There's just some connection.
Right. So 3 benefits: creativity, connection, transcendence. Talk about connection. How does bittersweetness, this way of being, the state, foster connections?
Okay. So I'll give you the simple answer, and then we should really talk about the evolution of it because it's so interesting. So the simple answer is just when people truly open up to each other about what they truly feel and experience, as opposed to their polished social selves, that forms a bond between them that is very real and different from what you get through just regular schmoozing. And this is why I say, if we live in a culture where everything is surface smiles, we're giving up on one of the strongest bridges that we have to connect with each other. And the evolutionary reason why this is true, that's so interesting, is that the whole basis of human love, like the human ability to love the way we can, it comes originally from the love of the parent for the child, and from the need of parents to protect these infants that arrive into this world incredibly defenseless, like much more
Right.
defenseless for human beings than for any other mammal around or any other animal around. And so we are primed to respond with love, caring, attention, everything to a being that expresses vulnerability. And from that arises this capacity of humans to react to anything that triggers that echo of what what an infant means to us. And obviously, it doesn't mean that we do this all the time, because we, of course, have these capacities for cruelty and indifference and everything in between. But that is one of the greatest triggers that we have of love, is when we can express those vulnerabilities to each other.
And there's also some evidence. Also, I want to come to some of the takeaways here, but there's also this kind of forecasting error that we sometimes make, where we fear that if we reveal our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our problems, that people will think less of us. And there's some good evidence, perhaps precisely for the evolutionary reasons you're describing, that people often think more of us.